Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for choosing this. There's so many things you could be doing right now. You could be eating, but you chose to be here, and that's pretty cool. My name is indeed Nikki Thibodeau. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm so overjoyed that you can see my whole outfit. I have not been in this kind of scenario for the last 2.5 years, and I put on pants. Yeah, thank you. And so I'm super excited. I am maybe a little bit nervous, and so you're gonna ignore any time you notice that. But we're gonna talk about building safe spaces. And the best thing about community is that it's for everyone. You can build a community for any group of individuals. Show of hands, who agrees with that? You can build a community for any group of individuals. Yeah, so I spent the better part of my career mentoring small businesses, and when I'd ask them about their target audience, they would tell me a lot that they were targeting everyone. Yeah, so one of the things that is true about us is that we have to know who we're building community for from the jump. We have to understand what purpose we're trying to serve and what purpose we're trying to serve for the business too. And today I want to talk about building an inclusive space, how to pivot that space. When it's too inclusive, stay with me, it's possible, because I'll give you the real example of when that happened to me. As you build community spaces and strategies, you need to think about who the community is for and what the social identity of that community is. And it needs to be an identity that gets people to the room, to the table, excited about what you're trying to do. And you want your events, your forum discussions, your marketing materials, you want all of that to tell the story of what that social identity is going to be. And it's the thing that reinforces the community, the belonging, the reason why we gather. And I'm going to talk about this with a framework of an employee resource group. Because while it's important that we're always inclusive, if we were to talk in video game terms about inclusivity, an ERG, an employee resource group, is like the final boss. Because you're dealing with people's identity to the core. And so let me define what an employee resource group is. This is a definition from Catalyst, which is a global nonprofit that helps build workplaces that work for women. An employee resource group, an ERG, I will say ERG a lot, so please note right now, employee resource group. They're voluntary, which is a discussion for another day, but they're employee-led. They foster a diverse, inclusive workspace aligned with organizational mission, values, goals, business practices, and objectives. Does this look familiar? Yeah. So these are voluntary employees at the final boss. So how do you go about building that inclusive space? Well, one thing that I'd like to acknowledge is that it's really uncomfortable. I didn't check if I could swear, so that was me censoring myself. And it gets us to stand outside of ourselves and our experiences, and it makes us make decisions that could be wrong. Because by being inclusive, we're including people who maybe don't look like us, or maybe don't have the same experiences. And so we can't be 100% sure that what we're building for them is going to land and resonate. So you have to take those shots. And one of the things that I used to tell myself about leading a women's employee resource group was that maybe I wasn't the exact right person for the job. And maybe I wasn't, the human that was the best, but I was the human being willing to do it. And as community builders, we need human beings who are willing to do it. Because at the end of the day, the payoff of building an inclusive space is so vast. And I'm not using a hyperbole, it's literally life-changing for individuals. You'll also notice at the bottom here, it says Nikki 2987. Don't ask what the 2987 is. There wasn't 2,986 other Nikkis. There's purpose. You can ask me in person. But that's my social tag, so you can find me everywhere. You can tweet me. You can LinkedIn me. But let's go ahead and talk about building an inclusive space for women. Really on the nose for me, but as the community builder, it's not enough to say that this group is for women, and then they'll just feel like they belong, right? We have to think about the intersectionality of the women who this group is going to make up. And so I liken this process a lot. I am a marketer. Any other marketers in the room? Yeah, yes, up in the back corner. Excellent. So I liken this a lot to building a target audience and that social media marketing strategy that subsequently comes after it. We often talk in marketing about this 80-20 rule, where 80% of the content that you produce is going to be for the human being that you're trying to target. You're not talking about your products, you're not talking about your services, you only do that 20% of the time. And so intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. I know that sounds big, but it's true, and that's what we have to think about. And we have to consider everything and anything that can marginalize a human. So we're talking about gender, we're talking about race, about class, about sexual orientation, about disability. And so it is women, of course, but it's also mothers, it's Black women, it's Indigenous women, trans women, caregivers, women who are poor, women with disabilities. And you need to understand who you're inviting to the table so you can create the content that makes them feel like they belong. Okay, audience participation. I am going to go 1, 2, 3, and then on 3, you're gonna yell out who you are building community for. Who are you building community for? Okay, wait, 1, 2, 3. Love it. Everyone. Cool. We'll talk later. So I heard small businesses. And so for that community, Liz isn't going to just go, oh, you're a small business, you're in. And they're gonna immediately feel like they belong. And admittedly, I'm not a part of Liz's community yet. So I'm not saying that she's not already doing this, but it's also finding out about who they've unintentionally excluded. Unintentional exclusion. Are you white? Have you been building content that really resonates for you? It's very possible that you are excluding, unintentionally, but excluding people of color. Is your content accessible? It's not just about having the ability for someone to walk through the door. It's thinking about their neurodivergencies. Are they able to participate with your content? Once we've launched the communities, we do an audit. And we think about who might not be present. And it's not just about having a diverse set of presenters. It's about building content for those who aren't included. How would your content look different if it was built specifically for those folks? If you do nothing from this presentation today, I just want you to go back into your community and figure out one group that isn't present. I'm not asking you to include everyone. That's not what this presentation is about. It's about slowly building inclusivity by recognizing who's not there and then why. Like, how would your content look different if it was built specifically for those folks? There is such thing as being too inclusive, though, okay? Yeah. Back to the question I would ask small business owners, and I asked you guys. People would say everyone when we're talking about their target audience. So not cool. But sometimes when we're building programs, our programming can overlap with other groups. And then those folks might become part of our community. Or sometimes we find ourselves, we've made a mistake and we've included people who now kind of rub the wrong way in our community. Or what I see very often is you're hired into a community that you need to pivot. And you need to figure out, who am I including who doesn't need to be included, who's taking away from that conversation? So This next part is both these two things. It's how to pivot a space that's too inclusive, but it's also a real example of when I did this by accident. And so let me introduce you to Shopify's Women Employee Resource Group. In 2018, we recognized a need for advocacy, support, camaraderie, and the Shopify's Women's Resource Group was born. It was created, and it was named FemPower. That name will become, there's some of you, I just saw you cringe. It was called FemPower. That will become important later, but a lot of phenomenal, impactful work was created during that first year, and I hopped on board in 2018, but more officially in 2019, and one of the programs I created was called FemPower Hour. Now, FemPower Hour is an hour-long discussion that promotes sharing vulnerably in a safe space and learning from that experience. Topics for each Empower Hour, or FemPower Hour, were chosen from the facilitators group. When I first started, it was just me, but then we grew and we had a facilitators group, which was really cool. And we took submissions through an anonymous form. So we had topics like periods, microaggressions, being a first-generation immigrant, conversations that you just don't have at work. We created space for those conversations to occur. And in FemPower Hour, this is me patting myself on the back, this is me having the audacity to do that, became our flagship program of the ERG. In 2021, our numbers were we had 53 events. We averaged 86 attendees per month, 25 different facilitators, and we grew into EMEA and APAC. And so the reality was when I first created FemPower Hour, it was for women. And then I received feedback that I should maybe be more inclusive, so it was for those who identified as women. Okay, now I'm going fast for this presentation, but please note that every step of this evolution involved a ton of feedback from the community, and then me educating myself and my team. And so, so now it's for those who identify as women, but then I received feedback that if those who identify as women could get value out of these conversations, that those who are perceived as women could likely also get value from these conversations. And those are usually folks who are outside of the gender binary. And so, okay, great. So now FemPower Hour is for women, those who identify as women, and non-binary folk, unless otherwise stated. Whew. Okay. But remember how I said that this was our flagship program? And I was running a women's ERG? Well, now my community was made up of everyone who came to FemPower Hour, and we had a real choice here. In the section about building inclusive spaces, I talked about who are we unintentionally excluding, but in this case, we were realizing that I was unintentionally creating a program and including folks outside of those that we served. And the catalyst for all this was actually through all that educational work I was doing to be more inclusive, I figured out that the term FemPower was like, hey, we're empowering femmes. And you don't need to be femme to be a woman, thank God, or else my voice wouldn't be included and my face would need to have makeup, but it doesn't. And so we were gonna have to change the name anyway. But this gave us a really good chance to audit the community and figure out what our next steps were gonna be. So we had to make the decision, are we going to rebrand into a gender minority ERG, or are we going to stay a women's ERG? This is where it gets really uncomfortable. Because you have folks who joined the women's ERG because it was for women. And so you're potentially going to change that and include others, which there are bonuses, there are clear deficits too. But if we go back to being a women's ERG, we're now excluding a group of folks who we unintentionally included. We set out on a 6-month journey. Now, this can likely be done faster in your community, but remember, we're all volunteers and we all have a full-time job. So we met with the company, the business, which was for us, the diversity and belonging team. We met with folks who, all the folks that this would affect. So those outside of the gender binary, those who identified as women. And we also met with, what was really important was seeking out other ERG leads externally and figuring out what they have done and the feedback from those moves that they've made. Because remember, this CMX is one of the best reminders of this, but we're not alone. We're not alone in building community. And likely someone has done this before or can help you navigate, so make sure you reach out. But one of the things that I really want to drive home about when you're trying to make a change to your community is let your community know. Be really transparent. Because when I finally got up the gall to be like, hi, we're going to change things, and I don't know what that means. I haven't figured that out yet, but if you have an opinion on it, please let me know. And then for the first time in forever, that's like a song, first time in forever. But finally we had people using their voice and saying what it was they really wanted from the ERG. It's really appropriate that Priya Parker was here today because her book, The Art of the Gathering, was actually pivotal in us making this decision. She talks about the need to exclude people from events. It's completely okay and even necessary sometimes. She says that thoughtful, considered exclusion is vital to any gathering. Thoughtful, considered exclusion. And then she further talks about, I'm going to read because it's her words. When I talk about generous exclusion, I'm speaking of ways of bounding a gathering that allows diversity in it to be heightened or sharpened. And so in her book, she talks about, and actually she mentioned it today, about having a dinner party. What's the purpose of that dinner party? Who are we inviting to the table? What kinds of outcomes are we trying to have? And if we invite even one wrong person to that table, no matter their intentions, instead of having that deep, enriching, is that a word? Sure, conversation, we end up educating that one person and getting them up to speed. And all of the value from your gathering is gone. So in the end, we made the decision to rebrand to Women at Shopify, leaning into building a more inclusive space by excluding. It still makes me nervous to tell people this, like new people who weren't involved in the process, because there's so many questions. I'm sure all of you have, like, how the fuck did you make that choice? And there were a lot of reasons, and not all of them, it didn't go 100% this way. We had to make a decision. And so the original purpose of the ERG was for women, which meant all of our programming, except for what was rebranded to Empower Hour, which you might have heard me accidentally say, all of the content was for women. So we didn't actually have any resources or support for those outside of the gender binary. And then through all of the education and folks coming forward, it was clear that there is actual trauma experienced by those outside of the gender binary by women. And there was going to be needing some healing and some education on women's part to be able to include them in a safe space. And so it was clear that that space was not going to be built by women. It was going to have to be built by them. And so we partnered with our Out ERG, and we helped create a net new space for them to create for themselves. And after making the decision, you're going to have to communicate that back to the community, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But for us, when we communicated, we tried to make it as clear as possible what was changing and what wasn't. We communicated why we made this change. It was a big letter that I got to send out, or I volunteered to send out. Just understanding or explaining why we made this choice. And then what we did was, you likely won't have to do this necessarily in your community because you aren't necessarily dealing with deep-rooted identity, but we had to create spaces for them to have that conversation about the change with a coach so that they could understand what that change meant for them and get through. We all don't like change. Do you like change? No. It's hard. It's really uncomfortable. And especially when maybe you feel blindsided by the decision, because I don't know about you, but I've definitely been a part of a community that went a different way, and that excluded me. And I didn't feel like I had a voice in that change, and then you just feel lost. So communicating the change at the end of the day, so important, and giving them space to figure out what this means for them. So at the end of the day, did I please everybody? No, I didn't. But what ends up changing here is that I'm given the opportunity for women to get educated on how to include folks outside of the gender binary in their space. And then I've also net new created a space for those outside of the gender binary to get and gain resources. I absolutely did hurt some folks, and they told me, which is very fair. And so that's why this work is uncomfortable, but we need to be community builders, human beings willing to do it. And so I think it was the right move, and I think it was the right move for right now. But what I hope will happen down the line, once there has been some healing, once there has been some education, that the leaders of the ERG will come back and they'll audit, they'll acknowledge where they are, and they'll assess through listening. And so I've got like 3 steps. And as we all know about steps, there's like 700 steps below each step. But the process that I would like you to do is go back to your communities, do an audit, and figure out, usually what you do is you go back to your community strategy and purpose and see if you're including the right members to get to that end result. And then you're going to acknowledge what is. So for good, for better or worse, you need to acknowledge the spot that you're in. Then you need to inform your community or listen to them and tell them, hey, we're going to maybe change things. What do you think? And you need to listen to them. It's uncomfortable. It is a lot of stepping away from your bias, acknowledging your biases, and really getting vulnerable with the fact that like we're imperfect humans and we make mistakes. And so you're going to want to listen to them. You're also going to want to consult with the business, because usually, unless you're running a community that doesn't have a business, at the end of the day, the business will care and have an opinion. So make sure you're consulting with the business early. And then once you've made the decision, you want to inform them. Let everyone know. Give folks the space to vocalize their opinions. It will sound very negative when you make a big change, especially when it means you're excluding folks. But if you've done your thoughtful, considered exclusion, then you can be confident that you've made the right choice for today. And the other thing is be clear. Brene Brown says, clear is kind. This is how I ran the Women's ERG, is that we're all imperfect. I am not the expert in ERG building. I was just the human being willing to do it. And so hopefully now you'll go back to your communities and run through, acknowledge, listen, inform, do a little audit, and you'll be able to be more inclusive, whether that's by including or excluding. We do have time for questions. I can take 2 questions. And does anybody have one? If not, I'm going to, oh, yep.
It's clear that you obviously had a lot of really tough feedback conversations. And I'm sure that affected you. Did you have to draw a boundary at some point, or how did you protect yourself?
So the question was, it's clear you've had a lot of tough conversations. How did you protect yourself during the process? And to be honest, I cried a lot. It was a lot of like, so I have a therapist that I meet with monthly. I think everyone should have a therapist that they meet with on a cadence that works for them. And then I increased my visits with her. And I think that like what's really important is acknowledging that you need space. But your community is not about you. It's really about them and the purpose. And so making sure you have your own space is very important. And so I created a safety net of folks. One of the things about when you're talking about people's identity is my safety net couldn't include folks who were outside of the gender binary, because I'm speaking about my experience and my hardship within the space, they have to include women, because you can't include others who are going to experience trauma from what you're going through. So you want to make sure you have the right circle and you're talking to the right people, that you're not traumatizing someone else. One more question? Yeah?
Did you have to relook at what the community guidelines were and have your members rebuild them and match them?
We didn't. So interestingly enough, if we go back to what did not change and what changed, so what did not change was actually the mission, the vision, and our values. What had happened is I created a net new program that then kind of included more than what we had originally set out for. So what we did change was the name, the logo, and the colors. And so putting it so blatant terms of like, look, we didn't intend to go this direction before, and this is what we're going to do about it, was extremely important in owning the fact that, like, look, we're going to still have Empower Hours. Empower Hours still exist. There's now 50 facilitators, which is so wild, but Shopify is 12,000 people, so makes sense. But yeah, it was really just reinforcing that we didn't change anything. I have time for one more question. Yeah.
So that's a question as it is, just like thank you for sharing. I
Oh.
really know about the difficulty of like making quote unquote mistakes,
Yeah.
especially in this space. Like we're all fallible and human, and I just appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the last comment was about how great it is that you're up here, you know, being infallible, bringing this knowledge and being vulnerable. What I've learned through DEI work is, you know, this idea of giving people permission of like, everyone has a contribution to make.
Yeah.
And that's great to communicate, but how do you turn that into action kind of within and outside of the ERG in the scope of making things more inclusive and creating a better sense of belonging?
What's really important is to come back to your strategy and your purpose of why you're there, and you want to get feedback from the community you're building for. Because especially when we're like linked to a business, it's sometimes hard to communicate back to the business why this change needs to happen, because they're like, well, go ahead and do the thing we planned on doing, 3 months ago. But it's really important to make sure that you're listening to the voices of the folks who you're trying to make change for. And then it's the communication, the transparency often. So through this process of rebranding our ERG, I did bi-weekly updates. And sometimes it was like, I don't have an update. We haven't had meetings. We all have full-time jobs. But it was just being very clear about where we were in the process and then allowing space for feedback.
As a communicator, the focus on communication and the space for feedback, love it. Makes me so excited. Well, thank you, Nikki.
Thank
This
you.
was wonderful.
Thanks.